Yeti only look fierce, gamers. Hi, I'm Matt, and I make games. I make video games professionally, and as my hobby, I like to make board games and role-playing games. And in this channel, Game Design Game, I talk about game design techniques and ideas and whatever subjects come to mind. Game Design Game channel is also a playable game. I won't get into the rules in every episode. You could start with episode 0 if you want to find out how to play, but one quick version is to pick some word that I say in the videos and guess how many times I say it. If you don't guess too high, then that's how many points you get. You can check out the Discord channel, links below, for more details about that rule and more of the rules to play the Game Design Game game. In this episode, part 2 of a Tomb Raider Legend playthrough and design guide. So I worked on some of these older Tomb Raider games, so I know a lot about the gameplay implementation. And so for every chapter of the game, I will pick some topic and get into a little bit of details about how to think about systems like that and some of the problems you'll need to take into account if you want to implement these systems in your own game. And how to evaluate them if you're playing games and you find systems frustrating. This might give you some insight into how hard it is to do certain kinds of gameplay. So let's just get into playing Chapter 2 of Tomb Raider Legend. Game Design Game. All right, Episode 11. This is going to be Tomb Raider Legend, Chapter 2, Paraiso. And I don't know what mechanic I'm going to be talking about yet, but as I play through Tomb Raider Legend, each chapter I'm going to pick a different topic to talk about in a little more depth. In episode 10, chapter 1, I talk about push-pull mechanics and some of the interesting challenges around that. So let's just get on into play, and I'll figure out what I'm going to talk about as I play.
All right, who was that?
You've heard of the Rutlands, right? From the States? Well, you just met the senator's youngest son, James Rutland.
Winston, take a look at this. It's almost identical, just configured differently.
Identical to what?
Something I saw a long time ago in Nepal, miles from any pre-Incan culture.
Try Peru. You talked about Paraiso.
He did imply there's information about the artifacts there.
He said you've been to Paraiso. What happened there? And who's Amanda?
Zip, ring Anaya and see if she can meet me in Paraiso Saturday morning. They don't seem quite so keen on visitors these days.
Well, hey, you're the one with the guns.
You can't blame me for knowing how to accessorize. Any word from Anaya?
She said she'd meet you at the statue in the marketplace.
At least we'll have our privacy.
Okay, here we are, level 2, Pariso. Got a little target shooting dummy where I could practice my shooting if I really wanted to. So this is where it's officially teaching the in-range and out-of-range reticle. We use our kick mechanic to kick around a soccer ball. Don't remember if there's any secret goals. Maybe this. Looks like that might be a goal. What happens if I kick the soccer ball in there? Whoa. Oh, they're cheering me! Look at that. Okay. This is as good a place as any to just talk about ground movement. Every 3D character game like this needs to think about it. And on a flat ground like this, it's about as easy a case as you can think about. So, ground movement, in which I include idles, right? That's just standing still. Slow walk. Fast walk and jog. In this game, I don't think Lara actually sprints. This is about as fast as she gets. So later games introduced a sprint mechanic for an even faster run. And so the basics are just moving the character and animating them to match the speed of their movement. Which in and of itself is harder than you might think. But because it's so common in every game, most animators kind of know what paces to run through, and the game character really just needs to worry about maximum speed and how to interpret the analog stick. So analog stick inputs can be a little tricky because they don't always get back to a true 0 when you let go of the stick. There might actually be numbers going into the game for very tiny values where it's not quite centered. And so most game engines have what's called a dead zone. And the dead zone is just a very small amount of area near the center of the stick that we assume to be the perfect center, even if the stick is not quite recentering itself properly. So out of the dead zone, we interpret this stick input usually scaled to a 0 to 1 range for like just barely out of the dead zone to full stick. Of course, talking game controllers here on the keyboard, it's pretty much idle or full stick is all you get unless you introduce a slow movement button. Like many games use a stealth button or a crouch button to give you a slower movement. On analog sticks, you kind of get that a little bit easier and a little more nuance in speed. You can see she's really got kind of 3 speeds of movement. This is kind of a sneaky walk, regular walk, and then the jog. So something that is in Tomb Raider Legend and a few games, but not a lot of them, is what we call foot locking, or an inverse kinematic animation system that tries to make sure that her feet stay on the ground. In Tomb Raider Legend, we worked very hard to avoid her feet sliding, right? So in a lot of games, you'll see when the character's turning, their feet are going to slide. It looks maybe like they're skating on ice a little bit. But in this one, you can kind of see that, other than some tiny bumps in the road, really her feet stay very well planted on the ground there. Even when she's rotating a little bit, the feet don't just rotate in place. And so in normal play, that looks pretty good. You can make it look funny, I think, if you do some crazy things on the stick where you're swizzling it around really fast. You can still get a little bit of sliding, but that's sort of what I like to call you get what you were trying to get. So if you're being a little crazy on the stick, then she behaves a little crazy on the screen. But for the most part, it's pretty good. And in addition, the IK system also handles uneven ground. That can get her to stand kind of half on this curb. Maybe, is that not introduced in? There we go, okay. So it was pretty basic in Tomb Raider Legend, not very smart. But you can see here she's got one leg bent and one leg straight. And so the idea is, normally when you're just thinking about walking and running, you think about it on level ground. And if she gets into a area like this where the ground is uneven, either one foot's hovering above the ground or one foot's sunk into the ground unless you do these inverse kinematics. And so what happens here is that she is using collision probes to detect the floor under her feet and determine that they're at 2 different heights, and then she picks up the higher foot, and if need be, also she may have to pull down the lower foot depending on where her center point is located. So video game characters usually have a single point position that's between the feet. In this game we called it the T node, that sort of a behind the scenes animator term. But it's the character's position if you have to pick one position in space. And that position could be on the lower ground here, or it could have been on the higher curb. And if it's on the higher curb, then that's where she thinks the ground is, and her outer foot would need to go down. So in this game, we're not detecting that. We don't realize that, or we don't have a way to pull her down to the ground. She'll only get that IK uneven step when her position is on the lower ground. I think in later games, we'll look again in Underworld, but I think in later games we added the ability for her to reduce that foot that's hanging off the curb and to position herself downward to match it. But not in this game, it looks like. So, basic ground movement, it's sort of the basis for everything else. If you're building an action game with lots of mechanics, all the mechanics kind of are going to start and end in these ground movement states. So from here I can do a roll or a little in-place jump, throw or grapple, interaction. And a lot of those moves need to work in different ways. So if I'm standing still, she just goes down like that and crouch walks. But if I'm running already, she does a forward roll, and that's the same button. On gamepad, that's the circle on PlayStation, or the B on Xbox controller. Similarly, a jump while standing still is going to be different than a jump while moving forward. And even the grapple throw, you see she can actually throw it while she's walking. So those are some of the easy and important things to think about when you're working on a ground movement mechanic. And maybe I'll touch a little bit more on this later. Let's go talk to our NPC over here.
Hello, Lara. You realize that the streets were not deserted a moment ago.
And I've been trying so hard to blend in. I hope I'm the one that frightens them and not something else.
There's nothing here. Just a heap of pottery shards, littered with the bodies of old friends.
Lara, go! I'll catch up!
Packs. Yay, physics. Alright. Run, jump. That's not good enough. What's this crate? Oh, no. There we go. That's holes. A lot of the times in action games like this, when you see fences and walls, it's really just how the level designers keep you where you need to play, so that they don't have to put buildings in an entire town for you to play in that don't have any real gameplay purpose. Okay, so now I've finished this little part of town, and there's probably some place I need to go next. Okay, let's come here and then go somewhere else. Security guy, just hiding there. Grenades. Back alley. It's a dangerous spot to set up. Characters can sometimes get stuck in very narrow places, especially if they're kind of V-shaped wedges.
Thought I saw
Somewhere. Here. Oh, motorcycle level. Let's have to talk about motorcycle. Alright, forward, back movement and brake. Shoot your gun while driving.
Yeah, baby, do that again!
So it's really just about not crashing into stuff. I don't think there's... Oh, the health pack. Don't like the look of that. Needed those. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a little hard to talk about it while I'm doing it. Obviously there's the driving a motorcycle gameplay. That's a challenge in itself. This one's got the added challenge of shooting. This is where automatically targeted combat is actually useful. You don't have to aim at the guys and just hold the shoot button and shoot them automatically. That's nice. design the level to, in this case, keep the motorcycle where we want it, right? We don't want to drive all over the desert. We just want to stay on this track. There's obstacles, physics that can mess with us. Alright, so I need to moderate my speed here.
How are you gonna get to it?
So,
Watch it, Lara. Truck to truck. Man, be careful.
adding vehicles to a game that doesn't normally have them, there's a lot of work that goes on there. Entire games dedicated to driving and racing, as I'm sure you probably know. So think very carefully before adding a vehicle section to the game. Unless you already have vehicles.
A few years after all, when stacked atop thousands more.
There's something I didn't tell you before. I think Amanda might not have died down there.
Is that what this is about? Closure?
Isn't that what it's all about? Why we dig up the past? To understand it?
I am an engineer, Lara. I build for the future. I don't dwell in the past.
You will someday. Eventually, everyone does.
Flashback.
Lara! Get down here, you slacker!
More examples of how the feet position themselves on uneven objects, and this works on, or can work on, rocks. Obviously not quite as good here. It's getting a little confused. That's because not really every position is easily standable by normal people, and so making video game characters do it can look unnatural. Official introduction to crouch and roll mechanics. And our grenade button is throwing flares today. I thought there was more over this way.
What's happening? Amanda! Amanda! Can you hear me? Amanda!
Oh, Sarah. Oh, God. What's happened?
Introduction to some of the traps in this level. Spears coming out of a wall. And Lara's friends are dying already. And here's a pushable crate. Alright, let me go check the other direction anyway. Seems like where they wanted me to go. Oh, I see. Cave in, so maybe I can't go this way. So this cave-in simulated using physics. And the physics is a little confused right now. Pretty ambitious, trying to use physics for blocking off levels. Things can go wrong very easily when you use physics. But it was one of our goals for this game to make as much use of physics as we can. So I'm pushing this crate even though I don't actually seem to need it. Oh, and the pressure plate keeps it in here, so I don't think I can take it any further. Another grenade or another flare. And get up here. Doesn't look like it. Seems like a Paraiso. Alright. Is there a higher place for me to get to? Yes, okay. Is this oh, I see, okay. Grab the spear. There we go. Okay. All my friends are dead.
My God.
Lara! Over here!
Kent?
It's too bad they didn't wait for me. Okay, there's a climbing rope.
What's going on?
It killed Oscar.
What did?
I don't know. I didn't see. This gate won't budge. Get me out.
It's all right. What?
There's a hole above me. You've got to get me out. Hurry, we've got to get out of here.
Yeah. Oh, what's right rope? Oh, let's try this. Okay. Oh, Rolley-Ball. Okay, so in my push-pull episode, episode 10, I talked about the Rolley-Ball as a push-pull option, so it works similarly to the cages, but it rolls instead of sliding. Okay, so that feels like it's go to the light.
Amanda? Amanda! It's her!
Wait! Kent!
Spooky monster. Guess I was supposed to do something.
Amanda? Amanda! It's her!
Wait! Kent!
So yeah, when transitioning from cinematics to action gameplay, it's very important and sometimes difficult to signal what the player needs to do. I'm actually controlling all this. But it was a different camera perspective than we've seen before. You know, I succeeded or failed, I don't even know. I feel like I broke something. I can hear myself running, but I can't actually see myself. There we go. Okay, let's try this again.
Amanda? Amanda! It's her!
Wait! Kent!
This does not feel right. Let's try again. Maybe I've fixed it by doing that. Okay. There am I. Got some notes on my... Since I got squished here, how's it look? Oh, off the edge. Pulls. Scissors. Position. Let's see if I can
Lara! Jason's dead! Everybody's dead! There's something... I don't know
I
what it
believe she
was.
could
I
squeeze through
only
those
saw-
buttons if she wanted to.
No!
Mommy! Swing's fine. There's what I do. I should save. I got actually. Waiting. There's no effect on the wall here. Not sure what's on there. I'll see behind. There's behind the wall.
Amanda! I think this stone unlocks the door. I don't like it. Are you sure you're reading it properly? Something is coming. You have a better idea? The door might be trapped. We're trapped. What time?
This was rising water in a cinematic situation, but in this game the rising and falling water works for in the middle of gameplay as well.
To be
I don't know if we'll
perfectly
see any
honest,
examples of that.
I think this is a terrible idea. Everyone agreed to leave things as they were.
I will as much as I can. But from what Rutland said, I'm sure there's a clue down there about what killed my mother. I have to go back.
There's no use trying to enter at the same point. It's caved in.
The river had to get in there somehow.
Okay, I think I'm gonna end it here. There's been plenty of Paraiso so far, and looks like I'm kind of at a point where I've got to go back in and do more of this. So, yeah, we'll take one last look at ground movement and foot locking before I go. Okay, I'm going to do a drawing board to try and help explain and visualize some of the challenges of video game ground mechanics. Most games may not need all of what I'm talking about, but these are some interesting things to think about, especially if you're trying to push the boundaries away from the sort of default movement schemes of game engines that you might be working in. First thing we're going to talk about is just how the analog stick input works. So on a standard game controller, the analog thumbstick is essentially a little tiny little joystick that you can move with your thumb, and you can tend to move it anywhere around a sort of a circular limit. It's generally like pivoting around a center point, and you can pull it right or left. You can push it forward or down, or up or down, I should say. And when you let go, it centers back towards the center of the stick range. So this would be traditionally called 0-0 position. While the hardware might use different numbers to represent it, typically in software we're going to convert those numbers to get us a range of -1 to +1 on an x-axis and -1 to +1 on a y-axis, so that you can describe the stick position's coordinates in an XY space. Another way to look at this, if you're familiar with radial coordinate systems, you could describe this in terms of magnitude and direction. And depending on how you map the direction, the angle might be sort of, from traditional mathematics, 0 is on the right, and the angle goes around this way from 0 to 360 degrees. In games where I've worked on the input schemes, I tend to prefer 0 being in the north position, because that's also sort of the default forward for playing action games. It doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent and understand what you're working with, or document it for other people who might be working with it. And the advantage of that is that stick magnitude is something you care about quite frequently in processing inputs. So you care if the stick magnitude is 0, that means it's at the center. If the stick magnitude is 1, that means it's been pushed all the way to the extent of its possible movement. So a magnitude of 1 can go all the way around the circle. And because of how this hardware is built, that's actually a very easy thing for players to do, is to stay at magnitude 1. Much more difficult is to stay at a middle magnitude that's only maybe halfway between idle and the outer edge. So it's generally impossible for a human player to do a circle of the stick that's at some consistent magnitude like 0.5. So anyway, that's how I'm going to be talking about these stick coordinates in usually XY coordinates or magnitude and angle. So I've got a little diagram here, and in an action game where you have different speeds the character can move in, generally speaking, it will be something along these lines. You may not need all of these different speeds, and you might even have more speeds. So the ones that will show up frequently in Tomb Raider games are idle, which is essentially you're letting go of the stick, and I include here the concept of a dead zone. So on an analog joystick like this, the dead zone is a little bit of space around the perfect 0, 0 coordinate, and its purpose is so that when you let go of the stick, even if the hardware doesn't center it perfectly, that the game ignores it and thinks of it as idle, even though it's perhaps not perfect. And the goal is the dead zone needs to be as small as you can make it, but big enough to handle older gamepads or joysticks that maybe don't work quite as well as when they're brand new. So that's usually very small. I'd say you don't want to go bigger than maybe a 0.1 magnitude for your dead zone. And that still leaves plenty of the rest of the stick. And behind the scenes, when we're translating these inputs, typically what we do is we take that dead zone out of the hardware values that we're tracking, and then we treat the edge of the dead zone as if it's still a magnitude value of 0, and then just rescale everything from a 0 idle to a 1 run, and that means there's no missing data in the range. You can get a walk that is a 0.01 and it's outside of the dead zone. So I've represented the thumbstick here hollow with a dot in it so that I can talk about how we'd move this around. So when it's in the dead zone, it's treated as idle, and you push forward on the stick just a little bit. That would typically be the slow walk zone. So what I've represented with this blue circle is the thumbstick can be in some amount of range and you could be walking. And then as you press mostly full, but maybe not quite touching against the edge, you might track that as a jogging speed motion. So if the stick is anywhere in this yellow ring, the character would move not quite at the full run, but definitely faster than a walk. And so yeah, I'm just calling this a jog. Or this could be the regular run, and then the outer ring would be your sprint. And then if your stick gets sort of physically blocked at the edge of what the hardware lets you do, that's a 1.0 magnitude, and that is a full run. So anywhere around the outer edge, you want to use full speed. You don't need to leave a whole lot of room in here. You could maybe make it, 0.98 magnitude to 1, but because the hardware makes it very easy to stay at full magnitude, you really don't need to leave any sloppy ring to represent run. Anything less than full usually can just be treated as a jog or a walk. So yeah, this would be walking forward, this is jogging forward, and this is running forward on your thumbstick. And then when you let go, it snaps back into the dead zone and acts as an idle. Or you could move to the right, move to the left, or back up. So when I talk about the direction on a stick, we're assuming that the character is facing away from you, sort of looking into the screen, and you're looking at the back of the character. And then if you looked down at the thumbstick from above, you would get these 4 directions to think about: forward, left, right, and backward. And depending on what kind of movement your game uses, you might be strafing movement is where you continue to face in the same direction that the camera's looking, and you just move sideways. So you would kind of move to the left or the right without actually changing your facing. And you could still sort of aim into the camera aim in the direction the camera's facing, and still aim and shoot at enemies there. And then if you're in strafing movement and you hold down on the stick, you just the character is backpedaling. They don't turn around and face the screen. But for running around a world without fighting, sometimes it looks better and more natural to have the character turn based on how you hold the stick. So if you're moving in the forward axis, then everything is the same as when strafing. You just move the character forward; they're facing away from the camera. But when you move left and right, the character would actually turn that direction and start running to the left or running to the right and facing to the left or the right. And similarly, if you pull down on the stick, the character would actually turn around, do a 180, and start running towards the camera. And I think I showed that a little bit in the video earlier. But of course, this is an analog stick, and it doesn't just follow straight line axes. It could be anywhere in this whole circle zone. And so when you're talking about things like forward, left, right, and backwards, especially when you're developing the code for these, you have to at least give some thought to what happens if the stick is, say, at a slight forward, left, somewhere up in this zone, perhaps. Does this, when strafing, that is just facing away from the camera and moving in that direction, but when you're running around a 3D world, you would turn that way. But where these zones come in handy is if you actually want to do animated turns, like 90-degree turns. You may want to think about how far does the stick have to move before you're in a fast motion. So if the player moves the stick quickly, where can they stop it that would trigger a turn in that direction? So these do not have to be evenly divided around the circle, though they certainly can be. But if the player pulls down on the stick, at what point do they perform a 180-degree animation? and that's where you may need to translate the stick direction into different regions. And you can have as many of these regions as you need, but typically you only need them to trigger special turning animations. And you saw in the video how occasionally I would have Lara turn around on a 180 and play a special animation. That's because she was recognizing this zone as away from where her motion was. However, when you're talking about forward, left, right, and backwards, well, what happens if Lara is facing to the right and moving to the right? Then this whole stick input in the player's mind is already rotated relative to Lara. So the player is holding the stick in this right-hand zone, but for Lara, it's forward. And so what I've drawn on the floor here is, the orange arrow means that even though the stick is to the right and the character's moving to the right, then conceptually that's still forward in cases where that matters. And similarly, moving the stick down in that case would be right, moving the stick up would be to the left, and moving the stick to the left would be backwards. So this is a thing you need to watch for in 3D games where your character can rotate in different directions, is that the concepts of directions like left, right, forward, and back also rotate with the character. Now in ground movement, a lot of this doesn't matter because the character moves and faces in the same direction, and if they're not doing special left-right moves, you may not need to track all of this. But where this will become more important, and I'll talk about it some more, is when we get onto mechanics like ledging and ladders and poles. That's where left, right, forward, and backward end up having a lot more importance in how you process the controls. Okay, the other thing I've talked about in ground mechanics is this concept of inverse kinematics. And my crude little sketch here is just showing the inverse kinematics is what can make a character's sort of standing idle pose have a bent leg to sort of keep the foot on top of a rock or a curb or any point that's higher than where their other foot is. I'm not going to get too deep into the math of it. I'm going to talk more about the theory of inverse kinematics. So I'm not going to use this drawing much. What I've drawn here, represented with these lines, is really just a close-up of the leg of a video game character. And these lines are very, narrow, not like the character itself. But in video game animation, there's the concept of bones. And we call them bones because they serve the same function as bones in our body. But in the video game characters, the bones are really just, points with rotation. So the hip or thigh bone represented here, its position is at the top where it's attached to the hip. And its orientation, as I've drawn it here, is not quite fully vertical, but just slightly swung out to what on the screen here is to the left. And that moves the position of the knee, and the knee is the start point of the next bone down, the shin bone. And that's orientation is swung a little bit back to the right, and then that changes the end point of the heel bone or ankle, whatever you're going to call it in this crude model. They're kind of the same. And that sets the orientation of the foot. So again, not getting into the math of it, but that's how video game character bones work, is their positions with orientations, and the animation changes those orientations, and changing the orientation of one bone can shift the position of a connected bone. When doing ground movement, and if you're trying to stop the feet from going through bumps and curbs and disappearing, you need to know where those bumps and curbs actually are. So what I've drawn in purple here, this little arrow, is the concept of a ground probe. So a line probe in video games is a line that you are testing mathematically against other objects and terrain in the world. So there's a lot of math in it, and mostly a collision system is written once and it handles all these situations. So when developing this in your game, assuming you have a collision engine that handles line probes, you just need to understand where to set up your line probe and how to interpret what you get from it. So like character bones themselves, a line probe has an origin point, a start point, which in this case is the top of the arrow, and it's got a direction or an end point. Usually specifying an end point is pretty normal and a little easier to think about. And it checks for collision along that path. And the idea for setting up collision for an IK test, for adjusting the foot, is you want to start the probe above the foot, and I've drawn it here from roughly knee level, and that would handle a fairly high curb. Typically, you want to start it at the height of the highest curb, or just slightly above the highest curb that you would actually want the character to recognize and handle with IK. And so characters following roughly human proportions, a knee-high IK would be pretty extreme, but not impossible. So you're starting around the knee, and you want to probe down either just to the level of the foot, which means that if the probe hits nothing, then your foot can be at its sort of natural straight standing value. Or you can probe a little past the foot, and the advantage of that is it will collide with something, but that collision will help you to understand that, yes, you're actually planted on the floor, and might even let you do some fancier business where if one foot is sort of hovering above the ground, you might be able to do some IK tricks to actually pull that foot down to ground that's below where the animation puts it. So what I've drawn next here is, if this brown line represents where there's some actual ground collision in the game, in this case the probe from the knee down to the foot would collide at this spot marked with the red X and recognize that that's the floor. And then inverse kinematics has the job of saying, okay, well, if that's the floor, then I want my foot there. And in order to do that, inverse kinematics math has to say, okay, well, to get it up there, that means I need to raise up the angle of the thigh bone, compress the shin bone, so to angle the leg instead of being straight. You make that angle smaller so that you bend your knee more, and then similarly to compress the angle of the foot or the ankle bone so that the foot itself can stay straight and reach this position. So the tricky part, of course, is the math that goes into all of this. It has a lot to do with like what's there may be limits on some of these bones, right? There's only so much you can compress your foot. You can't press your toes against your shin, or at least most people can't. And so there's limits on there, and there's how much does each bend in the foot or in the bones raise that foot, and you have to cover that entire distance between where the animation wants it. So let's use that drawing. You have to cover the entire distance between the animated foot and the IK collision height, and all of that has to be absorbed by your rotations. So the good news is if you're using a pre-made engine, a lot of this math is built in, and there's helpful tools to where really you just have to give it the target position, and the systems built into the game engine will already handle all of this. So you only need to focus on the math either if you're curious and want to know more, or if you're trying to develop your own engine from scratch. You will probably at some point need IK. So I've drawn it for feet, and we're talking about ground mechanics, but this concept of IK also works for interactions where perhaps you want the character to grab a doorknob in front of them, and the doorknob might be moving, or or they might be trying to grab some object that's moving, and you can't always line up the character's position, but you can use IK to move their arm from wherever the animation is playing it to where the object is. And it's a similar concept of using the IK. You know the destination point, which in this case is the red circle, and then you just have to apply that inverse kinematic math to change the angles of different bones. And again, it's all some math there applied to the bones in order to, in this case, stretch the arm forward to where it makes contact with that target. So yeah, the leg and the arm, same ideas. Now, this can get a lot more complicated if the object was even further away from the arm, such that even a perfectly straight arm wouldn't reach it. If your character can't, for some reason, step closer, then you may have to apply the inverse kinematics up to the shoulder and the spine and actually have the character lean forward. And similarly with the feet, if you want the character to be able to put their foot up on a much higher object, you might need to then shift the foot forward a little bit to accommodate the limits of these bones. So this can get really complicated if you're trying to do fancy things, and when it's done well, it can look really good, and when it screws up, it can look really scary and comical. Anyway, that's a little introduction to the theory of ground mechanics, controls, and inverse kinematics. And now, back to our game. So here's another patch of level ground where you can kind of see her feet sticking pretty effectively to the ground. Very little ice skating going on. And so what's going on behind the scenes is that as the animations play out, they have little signal messages that indicate when the foot first makes contact with the ground, and that we call it locking the foot. And then they send a different signal when the foot should release and start moving naturally as part of the run or walk cycle, and that's unlocking the foot. And so when the foot locks and unlocks, that's when it turns on that an extra layer of that inverse kinematic effect, which can pull the leg out of the animated position in order to keep the foot in its locked position as long as possible. And so that can cause the legs to twist a little bit and bend a little bit. The goal is, of course, to try and keep it as natural human range as possible. So in the real world, our feet have friction, and that friction keeps them pretty well planted on solid ground, especially dirt and other high friction grounds. But in a video game, none of that is real. We have to simulate the concepts of friction and bodies that stretch and bend dynamically based on all these forces. And so yes, this inverse kinematic foot locking system was one way to do that. Those signals were also helpful in talking to the sound system, because it may not be the same messages, but at the same times, that's when you would play a footstep sound as when you lock the foot. So where ground movement gets really difficult, or more difficult I should say, is when you start accounting for rapid turns on the stick. So on a stick input or on a keyboard input, it's very easy for a player to turn very quickly, change directions, and you want the video game character to keep up with that, and if possible to do it without looking like they're snapping around too abruptly. So I'm spinning the stick really quickly right now, and you can see Lara's doing little twirls, and yes, her feet will slide in this state a little bit. Whose wouldn't? But on some of these slightly shallower turns and less frequent turns, like a 180 here, she's trying to turn around as quickly as possible while still keeping at least one of her feet mostly planted during the turn. So there's a bit of trade-off when trying to do slightly more realistic turns, in that sooner or later it's going to break the threshold of what you can plausibly achieve, and you want to keep that responsiveness in the game. You want the character to be able to turn around quickly if the player is really trying to go somewhere. You don't want the realistic animation to interfere with that sort of motion. So at some level, when the player starts doing crazy things, you can let the character be a little bit crazy. So as fast as this turning is, it is a bit silly, but otherwise she looks fairly reasonable. She's not spinning in place on an axis. She's leaning into the turn, right? So that's all done with a combination of code to actually simulate the lean, and maybe an animation blend to do a leaning run. But you can see when I'm running kind of slowly, she doesn't really lean very much, but when I start doing these faster turns, you can kind of make out that she's leaning a bit. You can see her feet are kind of the widest point on her motion. All right, that's enough of that ground movement. All right, this is the game design game, and I thought it would be a good time to review the rules. So I'm just going to quickly skim over the rules worked out in earlier episodes. Rule 1, the keyword rule. You pick some word and estimate how many times I say that word during an episode. And the score is based on your estimate. But if your estimate is too high, then you score 0 points. And the word should be at least 4 letters, like game, and that's to avoid things like and And in addition, there's a bonus rule, the hello rule, for the first 3 people who use my greeting in chat, the greeting of that episode, get a bonus points equal to the episode number. With the special rule for episode 0, the bonus is equal to however many episodes are posted at the time that you get your bonus, though it still only applies to the first 3 people. Also, if you're not among the first 3 to get the hello bonus, you can get the bonus equal to your best prior hello rule score. All right, rule number 2, the numbers rule. And this is your score is an estimate of the total of all the number words that I use during the episode. And again, if you estimate too high, your score is 0. And there's a little couple caveats on that. You can't combine numbers unless as a part of a context they're one larger number. So if I say 1, 1, 2, that would be a score of 4 points, not a score of 112 points. And also it only applies to numbers that I say, not things that appear on screen or things that might appear in the game. It's just to things I say. Bonus rule B, the Discord rule. If you introduce yourself in Game Design Game Discord, you get a bonus point, and that lasts for all time. The link to Discord is in the text below. Rule 3, words per minute. Your score is an estimate of how many words I say in the first 60 seconds of the episode. So that's just a quick way to score for someone who doesn't want to watch the whole video. And then the bonus rule C, the deviations bonus, is you get +1 bonus point for each success ending you reached in the deviations proof of concept game. You can find that, I believe that's episode 2, has a link to the entry point for the deviations game. And then playing through that can lead you to different endings. And if you comment on a success ending to prove that you got there, then you get that +1 deviations bonus for the rest of time. Rule 4, making faces. You estimate how many distinct game faces I use in each episode. The game faces are the little colored comical face things that I attach. You guess how many I did, and that's your score. And again, unless you guess too high. And then bonus D, the catch-up bonus, is for latecomers to the channel. You get bonus points equal to the number of episodes that you submitted a score for the first time within the last 7 days. So basically, if you binge watch to catch up, you can get a lot of bonus points to help make up for lost time. And here's just a summary of the rules so far. So you can just see them by name. If you want to read more about the details of these rules, go to the Discord channel. All of the rules are documented there, as well as there's places where we can discuss any changes that we might want to make and resolve any questions, anything that's not clear, we can resolve in the Discord channel. And finally, when posting your score, if you wanted to sort of be an official score submission, one that we can verify for contests and things like that, it really helps a lot to be clear and use this format. So where you specify which rule you applied, and for example, with the keyword rule, which word you picked, like game, give your score, the estimate that applies to the primary score, list out each bonus that you've earned. Bonuses apply to multiple episodes. And then a total score is helpful when we're looking for contest winners. We look for the biggest total scores, and then we just have to confirm that they didn't go over. So that should get you a quick refresher of the game design game. Thanks for playing. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Game Design Game. Next time we'll be continuing the Paraiso level and talk about some more game mechanics and how to think about them in video game development. Don't know which mechanic yet. Until next time, gamers, stay sharp.